Welcome everybody. We're going to talk about venture capital, moonshots, you know, go big, go home, all of that. So, meanwhile, we'll just do introductions. By the way, all three of us have three different designations. We all do the same thing. We simply write checks, right? So all of us are owners and managers of our funds. And they say, I'm a general partner, managing partner, investor, with the same thing. It's very funny how we choose designations, right? Uh, okay, Ash, uh, what have you been up to in last, Sama Capital is known for starting from Paytm and Lending Card and Snapdeal, many massive companies. Last 12 months, what have you been up to?
Well, yeah. Well, I think last 12 months have been very interesting. Actually, last 3-4 years have been interesting with the pandemic. But I think we are encountered right now with a very different market than we had 3-4 years ago. But at the end of the day, our job is to support our portfolio companies. Our job is to find new investment opportunities and to find exits for our investors. And I think we've been doing a bit of all three. We've made some very good new investments over the past 18 months, including companies like Mokobara. We've had exits. We just took one of our portfolio companies, Sula, public, so that's another one. And then supporting our portfolio companies like Lending Card and others that are growing at such a rapid pace. So it's kind of a mix of all. But we've been busy, and even though people say there's a funding winter, internally we don't think that way. We think if there are good opportunities, we will invest.
Awesome. So Priya, very envious of your portfolio, right? Meesho most of all, right? I think the country was wondering if we'll ever see another Flipkart. And we probably have a challenger to both Flipkart and Amazon now in Meesho. What have you been up to in the last 12 months?
I think the last 12 months have been a lot of introspection, as I'm sure is with all of us. I want to get into a little bit of nuance to add to what Ash said. I think two things have happened. I think one is we did a lot of introspection to understand. We're a seed investor, by the way. So we come 0 to 1, first institutional check for most companies. I think the one part of the introspection was, is there a structural need or change that is needed in the way the ecosystem operates, starting from the boards, right? What is the relationship between an investor and the founder? How do we create better, safe spaces? Because cycles are going to happen. But fundamentally, we say that we want to build strong companies, right? How are we actually enabling that or disenabling that? So we actually did a lot of work in understanding incentives, disincentives. And we've built some theories on how we as a fund want to function, how do we want to participate. And the second part is we've also been super active. I think the last 12 months, we've done about 6 to 7 deals. And our thesis is very clear. I think we have frameworks on the kind of founders we want to invest, our belief in the spaces. And since we are early, we sort of over-index on the founders more than the spaces. We've continued to do that.
Hey, but it sounds that both of you want to fund good companies. You don't want to fund moonshots. What is it like? Why no moonshots? Why, are you changing the definition of moonshot now, or both are saying good companies and nice companies and
Remember, good company.
Why is there mutual exclusivity? Good
I don't know.
companies can be
good
moonshots,
companies,
right?
like seriously, like is Webeng is a good company? Like, come on, they're a high growth company. They're not a good company.
But Anand, good companies are the moonshots of yesterday, right?
Okay.
Okay, you and I have a live example. When we invested in Lending Card,
Yeah.
at that time it was a moonshot.
Yeah.
Okay, we invested barely any money. In fact, my fund wasn't closed. I put personal money to warehouse the deal.
It was a crazy investment.
It was a crazy investment, but today you wouldn't think about it that way, right?
Huh.
Paytm, trust me, Paytm was the biggest moonshot of my life.
Yeah.
Everybody thought that Vijay was this maverick guy who's all over the place. You know him well. But one of the most mercurial founders I ever met in my life. So the moonshots of yesterday are the great companies of today. And in our business, if we don't do moonshots, then we're in the wrong business. And sometimes we're not always right.
Yeah.
But if we don't lose a little bit of money once in a while, we're not taking enough risk.
So I thought about these moonshots. I think I'll give you the history of Venture Highway. So Meesho, Moglix, you brought us ShareChat. We have ShareChat as well. In Fund 2 and Fund 3 as well, the last company we invested is this deep tech. The guy's stealth, Berkeley PhD founders who's building, and I'm very passionate about education myself. I have a 15-year-old. I'm actively involved. is building an AI-led personal coach to literally use your phone as a personal coach. My definition of moonshot is we look for founders who are structurally changing the industry. And there are two ways of structurally changing the industry. You can do it via deep tech, or you can do it via process distribution, innovation, or whatever. And there's no one answer to it, right? So, like Ash said, it's very easy to say moonshot today, but it's a hindsight analysis. I think we all agree that you see something in the founder or some insight that the founder has about a particular industry that is so different that you take a bet on that.
But it has to be disruptive. I think that's the point you're going to make, right? It has to be disruptive.
Yeah, I'd love to see companies which, we've had many great outcomes like Flipkart, Myntra, right? But I think in my mind, a company which will survive for 50 years, right? I mean, we have our own Facebook listed perpetual company, right? And hopefully Paytm is a perpetual company now. Zomato is going towards that. Info Edge has been a perpetual company, and look what all they've achieved, right? I mean, they were the flag bearer of Indian internet. And I'd say that it's better that founders think of that long term, right? And, all three of us actually advise the founder to retire, you're 60, and the founder says, okay, I'll hand over the reins, right? That'll be a moonshot. Because what we are seeing, and what we saw in the last decade was people went up, but then they couldn't really continue, right? For a very long time. So good to see definition of moonshots like that. Guys, we have a lot of stuff to talk. We all know each other very well. And Avlesh and Ankur have given us an agenda. But let me just take a break, ask you guys what do you want to hear from us. We're very flexible. Anybody, what should we talk about? What do you expect to touch? Engagement, of course. We'll talk about engagement, peppermint, we'll talk about that.
So, first thing first, I'm sorry we have an empty room here because everybody has moved to the operator tracks. So I want to know, VCs are not in flavor in this theme now, in this event. We are not going to do this again because everybody has moved to the operator tracks. We are running operator tracks.
Nice, very good. Good to see. That's how it should be, right? That's what we also want.
We That's actually where the real business is happening.
We want it that way.
Okay. So, first of all, thank you, Anand, Priya, Ash, for doing this. Would have loved to have Gautam here. He fell sick and we couldn't get him. There's this clear challenge of capital that most companies have. I think that's very visible and it's going to stay that way for some time. Now, one of the most difficult things in any company is to shift gears. When you've been doing things in a certain way, and now there are things beyond your control. There are macros. Now you have to do things very differently, shift gears. It's very difficult for these teams to adapt and change, right? And it takes time. What's your advice for these teams? Some of those guys are here, and this whole environment of all these laying off people. We have heard many cases of governance, compliance errors, etc.
I'll talk about that, right?
Yeah.
I think in fact my co-panelists have great examples lined up for that. We'll touch upon that.
Perfect.
I just mentioned one thing, right? I think we've confused growth in the last decade with spending money. We've had situations, there's a company called Friend, FRND, it's virtual dating, virtual romance. Very popular company. Now, we sort of tried to spend money to grow, didn't work. Okay? Then we said, wait, let's go back and work on retention, work on product. The guys sort of hibernated for 3 years. And then without spending a single dime, profitably, we grew 10x whole last year, 10 times. And we haven't burnt Series A capital at all. We raised $6 million. We're sitting at $5.5 million right now.
Wow.
So I think probably the plethora of capital, the fundraising opportunity was hurting our growth.
Easy capital. I agree.
And I think the growth that really comes in a startup is by working on product, working on the existing set of customers, word of mouth, retention, for example. And I think we didn't have the opportunity to build that. I feel that, yeah, of course, buying growth is easier than earning growth. And we probably fell into that trap. But it'll be a great transition. I think most people who go through that 1 or 2 years of pain, they will at the end of it will be very happy with what they accomplished.
Absolutely. Very enduring companies.
Sorry,
yes.
Priya.
Priya is making a point.
Ash, would you want to? So I actually have a slightly different point of view from Anand. I've been a founder before. So sometimes I tend to do this self-goal as a VC as well. I think it's a lot more nuanced. And the best example I have is like, I don't know how many of you are into fitness and trying to build muscle. It's incredibly hard as a woman to do that, right? Like, so there's lean muscle, and muscle, when you're just building, you'll do it with fat. But it gives you the maximum muscle growth, then you cut. So sometimes when you deploy capital as a founder, right, the thought for you as a founder is not growth at all costs, but to actually focus on one particular variable, which is getting growth, and then figure out monetization later, right? So yes, there are contexts where people have been very smart to discover value pools early on, but I think it's the function of the DNA. It's like a traditional business which starts with your own grandfather's capital. They can afford to do 20 years. The pressure comes when you've raised 20 million in seed fund, and I don't think anybody is going to sit quiet for you to discover value pools early on. So my advice to founders is that it's very contextual. The reason Amazon grew the way it did was because for the longest time, they were willing to just invest in consumers and building the consumer ethos there, right? And then they turned profitable later with the adding, even now, the biggest revenue generation is the web services, right? But India is still a young ecosystem. We have to figure out a lot in terms of what is the true value pools. So the advice is it has to be contextual. When you're changing the DNA, I think you need to allow time, which means have capital buffer to actually change the DNA. Because you're literally going to take a U-turn, which means culturally you have to align, board level you have to align, and give that patience to change the DNA. My worry is many people are one leg here, one leg there. That's going to be really painful.
No, I think there are two types of growth, right? One is what I call prudent growth, and one is irrational growth. And we've been through a wave of irrational growth. And I think that was fueled by more money than companies needed. And I think our peers in the venture capital industry and PE industry help contribute to some of that, because when you put more money than a company actually needs, you're putting artificial pressure on the company to grow. In fact, I just had a conversation with one of my really, really amazing companies. It's just about to close a huge round. And I said to the founder, the pressure of valuation growth is not yours. If the investors decide to put money at this price, the pressure of valuation growth is on them, not on you. You need to continue with discipline, building the business the same way you were going to build it before. If you do all the right things, the valuation growth comes automatically. But just throwing people at the problem, growing. So now what's happening now? You're seeing cutbacks. But I'll give you one example that is my favorite example. And this is an example of not just prudent growth, but also capital efficiency. I don't know how many of you here have used a product of a company called Viva sauces, right? So Viva was a company founded by, I would say, an amazing founder called Viraj Bell. We invested in the company at concept stage, 0 revenues on paper. And he had a simple plan. My eventual goal is to be the #1 leading brand in retail in my verticals. I only have one vertical today, mayonnaise. But I have a plan for 7, 8 verticals that I will roll out over the years. I want to be the next mini FMCG in India, right? And 6 years ago, everybody thought it was a moonshot, right? There's no way he can go up against the Nestle's and Unilevers of the world. Started off by selling product to Domino's. Every pizza you eat in this country has Viva ingredients all over it. And he grew that, and he got cash flow out of that to help launch a retail business, right? What he told me once will always stick with me. He says, I will raise capital for 2 things. When I need capacity expansion, or I have a huge vertical product launch. But otherwise, my operation should pay for my business. We've raised a total of 300 crores, 150 still in the bank. He hasn't touched it in 2 years, right? And we are now at almost a 1,000 crore company, right? So it's possible. Now, I'm not saying every example is like that. In tech, it's harder because you don't really have, revenues going. But it all depends on the founder. And also it depends on us to counsel founders to be disciplined. If we feed that frenzy, so my motto right now is very simple.
The counsel part, Ash. I think there's a lot more that could be done there. A lot of founders could use good counsel. The pressure the growth versus the growth rate pressure are two different things. Every discerning founder wants to grow. Any founder who's raised capital knows he's signed up for it, wants to grow the business. I think what needs a lot of this alignment is at what pace. And having every key stakeholder on the same page with respect to that solves for 80% of all these problems, top down. And then, of course, everything else is subsequently much
There is
more
a lot
easy.
of peer pressure also, right?
There is a lot of peer
We
pressure.
unnecessarily bring it upon ourselves.
Yes, I agree.
As VCs, we say, oh, our companies are not getting up rounds. And as founders, you're like, oh, watching other people raise a ton of money. I think at some point, it's a very lonely journey. I mean, starting a company is like that, right? And you have to derive satisfaction from what you perform instead of how much you raise in external validation, right? It's like, how good you are at pitching, and do investors like you? Most good companies are built when people sort of don't care about you, right? That's when you get the space to find your own niche, grow. And as founders, we'll have to learn to be comfortable with it.
And when founders talk to other founders, one of the biggest things I tell them is don't reduce your sample size to speaking to people who've raised a lot of money
Yeah.
and who are already successful. Please expand your sample size to people who've struggled. Because I think the biggest growth comes from personal struggle, right? And the problem with that approach is then you want to be in the league. Your definition of, or your anchor bias is what those 4 people told you. So expand that. And it's not an easy thing to do. I mean, including for us, right? Like for you to tell as a seed fund, 0 to 1, to tell the founders it's okay, let's not do an up round because I come in far earlier. Let's build this the right way. It's not an easy thing. And so it has to be done at a board level.
Okay, great. So we've got the fundraising discussion out of the way. Let's discuss a little bit about how to build businesses, right? This was important to get it out. So Ash, you've done a lot of D2C brands. I'm a big fan of Mokobara, for example. What's happening in the D2C brand market is that companies are struggling to grow either on their own platform. They are also struggling to grow on Amazon beyond a point. And most brands are now going offline, getting into and the founders have to learn that additional skill of opening stores and all that, right? How do you see the future? Is this going to be the future? Most brands will at some point soon enough, maybe 3-4 years, go offline, or you think like in US, we'll have a few $100 million of revenue purely online, purely on your own platform. How do you visualize next 10 years?
So I think D2C is a very different game today than it was before. I still believe that the best way for a consumer company to launch is to first start with D2C. India is a different market, size is different, buying habits are different. And what we see traditionally is, of course in the pandemic, there was no question of going anywhere but being D2C, right? So what we've seen is the best companies that break out is easy to get 30, 40 crores, and then 100 crores is the holy mark in our mind to say, once you hit 100 crores, the D2C angle is there, but you're now beginning to figure out how do I grow my channel. And eventually, I think in India, a pure D2C model will be not rare, but will be exceptions. Okay. You will see a blended omni-channel model. It will combine a combination of your own website or your own D2C channel. Then marketplaces will be next. And then third will be offline. And we resisted for a long time. Take a brand like Dimension, which we invested in a few years ago. And we never intended for this to go offline. But then we noticed some buying patterns. And once the pandemic ended, people started going out and actually shopping. They want to go to stores. It's an experience here. It's part of an entertainment of the weekends. And we launched Dimension shows. We launched 2, 8. Now 30, 40 will come up shortly. And every store is performing. That is just mind-blowing. So why not use that channel, right? And of course, then you still have the marketplaces, Amazon, Flipkart, etc. Right. We've seen the same thing with Mokobara. Mokobara, as you know, has done a phenomenal job with their D2C sales, presence, social media. I mean, it's probably one of the fastest growing viral brands in this country, in new age brands. But they opened their first store, and I know, Anand, you went to the opening.
Yeah.
That store is blowing numbers completely. And now we obviously have raised, we'll be closing more money shortly to go to stores all across. But interestingly, it's not always, you start in your hometown, so Bangalore is the home base, but it's not natural that you have to go to Delhi and Bombay. We are amazed at the revenues we are seeing from our own stores in cities like Chandigarh, Jalandhar, Ludhiana. So there's appetite all across this country. We're a huge country. And some of the cities in this country are larger than some states in the US.
Right.
So,
And Ash, at the same time, when founders start thinking of going offline, should they give up on growing their own revenue on digital channels?
no, it has to be omni-channel.
It should be omnichannel.
Because the digital, what it does is helps you with the brand. It helps you with the virality.
Right.
And for Mokobara, they can never give that up as an example because that's what is their specialty, right? So I think, as I said, the best companies will be omni-channel.
Right. Very interesting.
That's how I see this evolving.
Right. Priya, you don't have to do D2C brands that many, but a lot of consumer companies, right? And even they face this channel of, retention, expensive, CAC is high. And how are you seeing the future? Because that's one big driver of the burn, right? I mean, bulk of the VC money is going to Google, Facebook ecosystem.
And you're absolutely right. It's not just for B2C businesses. Even SaaS businesses
Even
today
SaaS, yeah.
are finding Google ads extremely expensive. The landscape has changed for 5 years ago. I think two things, right? It comes back to the first point initially I'd made, which is identifying value pools early on. You're at an advantage if you have capital. Whether we like it or not, capital is one of your biggest levers, right? Like with calories for muscle and fat, capital is critical. So depending on how much capital you have left, your ability to be patient, take certain calls is far better now. Having said that, it's a very different DNA I'm seeing with companies. We've invested in a few fintech companies, also in consumer tech. The way they are operating today, we had invested in them, say 8 months, and now they're going through this capital thing. The way they look at every penny, the founders are unafraid to say, look, I will not grow if I know. There's no point having, I'll give you an example, 1 million users when I already know that the percentage of the users who are going to give me some ARPU is only going to be 10%.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take my time, not do a 20-30% month-on-month growth, but I'm going to identify those value pools and double down on them and start figuring out whether there's a paying capacity. It's a very different DNA today.
It's very interesting. I think you mentioned fintech. What we are seeing is that fintech actually you can scale a lot more digitally, right? As compared to some of the other spaces. And but in certain areas, it'll be wiser if the founders, maybe third, fourth year, Ash, start thinking of going offline and becoming omni-channel. Maybe you do want to discover who you are and who likes you. Maybe digital journey first few years, but then you have to plan for an omni-channel journey.
Actually, one parallel to I'll give another example to what Ash said about post-COVID. And I come from an education, I ran an edtech startup. So this whole thesis of going crazy online for digital education, you're seeing it play out now.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, people want to engage, people want to go to physical places for their education. So that's also a great example of what he said, which is omni-channel. You need some digital studying or content or something. But people, it's a lot more of an experience when you go to a physical place to do your coaching.
And I think the consumer is different, right? Some consumers don't want to deal with the hassle of going to a store. They want to sit at home and have the convenience. And some actually like the experience of going to a store. Like, what impressed me at the Mokobara store the other day when I went there was people actually were interested in the product. They wanted to see the features, open the bag, show me this pocket, show me that. You can't really do that online, right? So it's just, if you are omni-channel, you'll adapt to all the different customers.
Yes. Ash, both of you are early stage investors, Ash. What do you recommend today? It's not growth, right, at any cost. So what should founders and their team members optimize for raising the next round of funding, right? Like what would a Series B investor today look at if it is not hypergrowth?
Yeah, listen, I think one thing that's very obvious now is revenues are important, but not solely. People are focusing as much on margins as they are on revenues. So they want to see good revenues. They don't want you just seeing buying revenues because that comes back to haunt you later. And the moment you switch off the money pipe to buy revenues, the revenues dry up, right? So they want to see sustainable revenues with good margins. And I think companies with lower revenue bases but with really strong margins are much in favor today from investors.
True.
So we did this exercise. I said we went through an introspection. So we sat with about 20 of our portfolio companies. And the first thing we said is, let's forget working towards the next rounds.
Yeah.
Actually, one of the biggest mistakes I feel we make is anchor too much on the metrics of the next round without focusing on the fundamentals. What does the business need? So we said, let's take the pressure out, and we did this workshop, right? So almost 50% of the businesses actually said, whatever feedback we got from Series A investors, we are not sure we'll be able to do that. So we said, okay, fine. If that's the gap, like for example, better margins or better quality of revenue. Say in SaaS, people say that it's not just enough you show this MRR, ARR. What's the quality of the revenues? So they said, this is the gap. We still have to figure this out. So that's the exercise we said. So what is it, the gaps that you have to build a fundamentally strong business? Do we have enough capital to achieve that? Or it's okay if you feel there are some shaky things you have to deal with, let's deal with today. So I think the first step at least is to disassociate, like we say in capital, right? Leave the equity debt aside. Let's look at capital dispassionately. Similarly, let's look at business dispassionately from the fundraise.
True. It's important to distinguish between the two. So what's happening is right now, there's usually now like a 2-year, 3-year gap between successive rounds of funding in startups, right? It's happening like that. And that brings in a lot more focus on metrics like retention. Because if you're raising money every 6 months, you can justify saying that, oh, my initial buyers haven't had the time to come back, but they will come back, I promise you. God promised, right? But if you have to raise after 2 years, there's no hiding with those numbers, right? I mean, your initial cohort is due for multiple purchases, and the focus comes too strongly on that, right? How do you advise your founders to work on retention particularly? Because as customer acquisition costs, they've been rising forever. LTV by CAC becomes very important. And investors also, incoming investors want to see real loyalty, real retention. Any specific examples of how things were turned around on these counts?
Without naming the companies, we did 2 workshops with our 2 companies where I think, again, going back to the point, like understanding customers deeply, this is a great time to see the connection of the customer with the product. So for example, we did a 200 primary survey with the founders. We advised them, let's go back to the customers and see what are they coming back for. And we kind of ordered the features. Very often in your growth space, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this, we sometimes feel satisfied by adding more and more features or making product changes without really understanding the 80-20 rule, right? So being very clear that this is the USP in the product and this is why the customers are coming again and again, which means you should be able to, again, lean muscle, be willing to let go of some customers who are being more expensive for you because you're building products which are satisfying only 10% of them.
Yes.
So I've seen that at least in 5 startups.
Yeah.
But having said that, Anand, practically all this is possible if you have an 18-month runway.
Yes.
Now, if you have a 5-month runway and you have to do all this, it's a very different
discussion. No, I agree. And I think which is why you need to give in today's environment at least 18 to 24 months minimum today. Whatever money you have left, you need to divide by 18 minimum. And that's your available burn. And you will have to focus a lot more on things beyond growth. Yeah. As you had some examples to add?
I think churn is very, very important to monitor. And I think quality of revenues. We've had companies, we have a company in our portfolio called Zenny. And that's one thing we realized at one point. We're looking at it. And this company has, by the way, 4 years of cash, right? So we're not concerned about cash. But the point was we are growing in revenues. But when you start analyzing margins per customer, you realize that some of the largest paying customers have the lowest of margins, right? So we had a new CFO come in and we said, can you look at these margins? Can you figure out where, and the thing is it's not just capital, it's also time and people, right? When you're servicing these large clients, they take up so much time and you're making barely any money, right? So if you've got a $150,000 client and you're making $5,000, wouldn't you rather have, $10,000, $50,000 customers, So I think you have to have good analytics on your revenues. You have to cut them, you analyze them, and I think the data is there, is whether you choose to focus on it or not. And sometimes the skill set is not there, right? So I think you look at, just don't think of finance as a controller function. Think of somebody in finance who can have a strategic mindset to also look at things like this, because that will help you. And churn is very, very important now, because the amount of effort it takes to bring in new customers.
And
hard.
layering analytics, at least in early stage 0 to 1, I can say, or 1 to 10, layering analytics over customer psychology is very important. When we all start off as founders, we land up speaking to so many customers. But as the company grows, the founders get little disassociated with customers. So another advice is to really be connected with the founders, because analytics also in very early stage, and you guys know this, can be misleading.
Yeah.
So the reason you're building features is because your growth and marketing team has told you that you have to build this feature. But when you speak to 15 customers, you'll know it's a very different ballgame.
Yeah. And okay, I think while all this is good, our government has been adding more nuances to how we operate. Right? It's not made it easier. We, amongst other things, and angel tax notices and all that founders face, we have this now new big elephant to address: data protection, third-party cookies, scraping of SMSs. Any fintech guys here who scrape SMSs and read everything? Okay, wonderful, right? So good luck with that scraping of SMSs now. Be careful. Ash, you know, a lot of fintech companies in your portfolio and outside fintech also. What should be the action of the founders, the product teams around these laws?
I think, with the new laws coming, by the way, let's just be honest with ourselves. The dust has not settled. They've just issued a circular, and as you know, a lot can happen between now and when the law is finalized, and it's always about interpretation, right? If you ever got a tax notice, which if you haven't, then you're not a real businessman in this country today. Okay, you'll know that it's all interpretation, right? But this new digital privacy law is very, very critical, because if you're collecting customer data in any form, you have to comply. The penalties are very, very severe. But the biggest thing about it is to remember very simply is customer consent is important. And giving the customer the ability to opt out of that consent is as important. So don't ignore this, because I think this could come back to bite you in significant ways, because the penalties are so significantly high. But it's very simple. If you're taking digital data, get the customer's consent and give them the option upfront. Let them know that anytime they want to stop that consent, they're welcome to withdraw it. So,
just to add a practical nuance to it, when I was in Bombay, I was speaking to some RBI guys. I'm sorry to say, we all live in our bubble. We are doing very important job, but that's restricted to Bombay, Bangalore, Delhi, NCR. Fintech, at least, they have a whole world out there. So the government will not just focus on us. They will do what is right for the masses. So we have to build compliant industries from day one. The practical aspect is your tech stacks, guys. So I've seen my founders go through this, which is you build quick and easy tech stacks for certain data flows early on. And tomorrow an RBI circular says, sorry, BNPL cannot go through this. You will have to go and reinvent the wheel. So actually, please build nimble systems day on. So the biggest loss is the customers are not going to forgive you because RBI is changing. And that's the biggest issue that you will face when it comes to consumer-facing apps, right? So having nimbleness, please have one leg or somebody dedicated to tracking policy, because very often in very early teams, you get to know on a later stage, which is an advantage for big teams where they're always having a pulse of what's going to happen and they're able to preempt. So either through your boards, if they have a policy team, or through your founder networks, please try and preempt and build nimble systems.
I think she makes a great point. It will change, guaranteed, multiple times. So be ready to switch and change.
Yes. I think most of these are frameworks, and they typically take like a few years to stabilize. So next 3-4 years, at least on this aspect, will be a little bit volatile, a little agile and nimble. Just be like, watch out for what's coming next. Right? Hopefully it'll settle sometime soon, like the GST settled eventually. Right? I mean, first 3-4 years of GST were very difficult for anybody who's dealt with GST as a small business.
I have 9 companies have received GST notices.
Oh,
so it's coming. They've issued 8,000 notices.
Yeah.
So,
wow. So, Ash, I used to say at some point the macro risk that this, I hope there's nobody from the company I'm going to mention, the macro risk that the country runs, the GST network is run by some of the IT services companies, right? So it's not by startups, right? They build better products. So I have some more questions. Guys, any question for us? We can take 1 or 2 maybe.
What is your advice for the first-time investors who want to start funding from 30 to 50 lakhs. First time investors.
Yeah, I mean, guys, 10, 15 lakhs is too less. The minimum number of investments to diversify will be 20. Go to platforms like AngelList,
No, I said 40 to 50 lakhs.
40 to 50. Divide by 20, build a portfolio of 20 companies, go to Let's Venture, AngelList, right? And build a diversified portfolio. Look at good syndicate leads, but a little less. I'd say that, I mean, I advise to people that, unless you have like 10 crore rupees to deploy, you will not really do well. I don't know. As like,
Or invest in Anand's AI.
yeah. No, I think, see, if your objective is to learn and you have real friends who you trust and who can, or like really world-class founders, you can dip your feet, but not as a wealth management initiative, right? I mean, I think for learning, I made one check in my life, 15 lakh rupees in a company called Ink Fruit. Okay, one of the earliest fashion companies, right? And I justified to my family saying that this is learning. That's okay.
I think you can't do capital protection and angel investing. So as long as you're clear that it's a money that
If
you
it's for
can
learning,
write off,
yes.
that's great. But I'll also advise that, look, I think angel investing, institutional investing is a big difference. So piggyback with people and piggyback with people who are good, right? At least whatever you diversify, there'll be one or two where you won't see significant
You'll
losses.
have to diversify a lot.
Follow smart people.
Okay. Yeah, someone in the back. Meanwhile, I have
a question
gentleman
here.
in the front, please. Yeah, you asked earlier also.
Here, I have a question here. In a dynamic environment, the technology keeps changing fast. What are the parameters you consider for this obsolescence in giving funding and all that? Because in nationalized banks, we find for the last 4 years, there have been mounting NPAs and they have not been paying dividends also. So how do you actually assess in this particular situation?
So I think there are two separate issues, I'm assuming. So one, you're talking about the technology obsolescence.
Can you just stick to that, and just the second one we can take offline?
Yeah. So second one I'll take offline because that's a separate issue. I think the couple of parameters that we look for, typically we like the tech skill blended into the founding team. If it's specifically a tech heavy kind of a product. And when I say tech heavy, I don't mean just deep tech products, but products like even in fintech where you need to build fast and build nimble systems. Generally, if you outsource that, it becomes very hard because your tech debt keeps building. But in cases where it's a very workflow based and domain experience needed, in fact, there are some cases where founders have not been able to find CTO upfront. They start with a VP engineering or something and then build the leadership layer later. That's fine with us. On tech debt, I think it keeps changing. First, you have to keep releasing your MVPs. You have to be iterative. So very often you will build on open source tools. You'll build on a lot of stuff, which is fine. But as long as you're able to parallelly make sure that you're not accumulating it so much that tomorrow, like some big circular comes and you're completely washed out, you have a plan in hand, I think you have to balance the two.
Yeah, I think there is no answer to Kal Chakra, right? I mean, Kal Chakra will consume everything. That's fine. But in the short run, before Kal Chakra comes for us, we have to just keep like what Priya said. You are aiming to keep changing things. You have to be willing to write off what you've built so far and build again. The gentleman here in the front. Yes, please. Yeah, please go ahead. I think the last question, yeah.
Thanks, Anand. My name is Ravi, and I'm founder and CEO of a healthcare startup. I'm struggling to understand why the investments in India are not going towards healthcare, which is going to be the biggest thing in the next couple of years.
No, we are all tracking. Yeah. Ravi, we are all tracking healthcare. We've made small investments. Okay. I made investments in home healthcare, doctors network, but somehow, our initial the physical networks was not great. We still feel that a lot of the world is still dominated by individual branded doctors. But outside that, we love healthcare. We see what the government is doing, and you will see a lot more action in healthcare going forward.
Yeah, we funded a company called Modern Family Doctor in Bangalore with probably one of the most well-reputed founders that you could find. And we really believed that this was an open space and there was a lot to build. But unfortunately, the learnings we got out of from there, it's not easy building it. And it's still around in some form, but it didn't scale the way we thought it would scale. But the opportunity is still there, I believe. But the question is how to tackle it the right way. And there's some challenges in healthcare practices that we need fundamentally solved first.
I have just 2 points. There are dedicated healthcare funds. India is one started by 3 women. They're only focusing on healthcare.
Quadria is there.
And exactly. The second point is we continue to have healthcare investments. What we need to recalibrate is, unfortunately, we can't expect the momentum like in other portfolios, especially if you're having a high-tech portfolio the way they are growing. There are some markets where structurally you have to be a little more patient. So that's a lot of fine-tuning we need to do.
But watch out for the UPI moment in healthcare. Maybe it will happen very soon, right? The government is working on a lot of things, and we're also watching it.
But the digital adoption, at least if you're doing doctors as a center, has been challenging.
Yeah.
Because there is adverse selection. Because doctors who already have a ton of business, it's very hard to get them to use digital technologies. The ones who need it are the younger doctors who need business, where it's a chicken and an egg, patients don't want to go there. And it'll
Fantastic
take a while.
summary. I think, Priya, this is what we felt in 3-4 investments till date. But we should watch out for how the industry will change, right? I mean, we used to say the same thing, that only banks can do certain things, and then UPI has flattened and created a lot of new institutions. So hopefully that will happen. Guys,
I think they want to kick us out. We've been around more than we.
we'll wind up. Thank you, guys.
WebEngage. Retention simplified.